Hello, everybody. What's good? Welcome to the Indie Grounds podcast. We have a pretty interesting episode lined up for today where it is about a band, but it involves another one as well. I appreciate all the listens that I've been getting and all the support I've been getting. I really do appreciate that. I love talking about indie music. And this band was actually one of my very first concerts, so I'm excited to talk about them. So the band that we're going to talk about today is the band called the Bravery. However, it's going to involve another band. So it's going to be about the Bravery, but they trash talked another band, the Killers, and it pretty much ruined everything for the Bravery. So let's kind of set up the scene first before we get into what exactly happened. So early 2000s, the Killers, they are, even to this date, one of the best well-known indie bands stemming from that time period. But at the very same time, another band called the Bravery were up and coming as well. In fact, Brandon Flowers, the lead singer of the Killers, dubbed the Bravery the Imitation Killers. So again, the scene to kind of set up. In 2004, the Killers released their album Hot Fuss. And anybody coming from that time period knows how huge that album was. It was everywhere. They had songs like Jenny Was a Friend of Mine, Mr. Brightside, Somebody Told Me, and all these things that I've done. They were constantly getting radio play, and they were selling out shows left and right, especially Mr. Brightside. That's probably one of the other big indie anthems. So that was 2004. The flip side, the Bravery came out with their self-named debut album in 2005. Now, that had a modest hit in their lead single, An Honest Mistake, had another hit in their song Unconditional, but it was not near the success of the Killers. A solid start, though. They were playing in a little bit smaller venues, but they were also getting invited to play on talk shows, kind of making the talk show rounds, playing in unplugged shows. So they were enjoying modest success as well. So the fight now. How did the fight break out between the Killers and the Bravery? Well, Brandon Flowers himself has come on record in fully admitting that he was the one that started it, and he was the one that kind of stoked the flames between the Killers and the Bravery. In an interview that he just did a couple of years ago, he said, to quote, "When we first started, I used to trash talk a lot of people. I grew up idolizing Oasis. They wrote great songs, but they would just talk so much smack to other bands. And for some reason, I thought to gain respect that it was just part of the territory to talk about other bands." So, of course, why did this get started? Why did Brandon Flowers kind of pinpoint the Bravery? Well, the Bravery's lead single, An Honest Mistake, again, came out about less than a year than their 2004 album Hot Fuss. And then the Bravery were actually picked up by a major music label. So, speaking to MTV in March 2005, Flowers started to kind of look around and take aim at several different bands. And to quote him, this is actually what he said at the time, his real words. He said, "Look at a band like the Bravery. They're signed on to a record label, that is, because we're a band. The Killers were a band." The Killers singer also insinuated that the Bravery had tweaked their sound to bring it more in line with hits like the Killers songs Mr. Brightside and Somebody Told Me. And he said that was a problem because there was a lot of talk that the Bravery were actually initially a ska band. And the final kind of parting shot, I guess you could say, that Brandon Flowers rather said was, "I can see the Strokes play or the Bravery play, and it's real. And I have not gotten that from the Bravery. I think people will see right through them." And we're going to get in a second to what Brandon meant by that. But, of course, the media brought that interview to the attention of the Bravery's lead singer. His name is Sam Endicott. So he heard that and he kind of retorted back to that. He said, to quote, "The poor little guy, he's very scared. I mean, I feel bad talking bad about him because it's like hitting a girl. It's like picking on a kid in a wheelchair because he has no personality and no sense of humor at all. So what can you say to that? And even the guitarist of the Bravery added in, if you've seen them live, they're incredibly boring. They look like wax figures. So again, some pretty strong return shots coming from the Bravery's way to the Killers. But to kind of end it, Brandon was known again, or was let known again about this interview, and he heard the Bravery's retort. So he responded, well, and again, this is a direct quote from him, well, you're poking me, and so I'll say this. To me, the Bravery just aren't real. So again, he said that before, so what did he mean by that? And he finally clarified it. He said, I've heard that the keyboard parts are all pre-programmed, and that singer can't reach the high notes on their song, An Honest Mistake. But I can reach those high notes. It's crazy to think that, it seems so childish right now, kind of looking back on those claims. But can you imagine somebody who's actually, they're not even poking fun at maybe something in general or maybe a specific incident that happened. Brandon is literally taking shots at your art. It just seemed like a low blow. Now, however, will I say what the Bravery said was any better? No, they could have absolutely handled themselves better too. But it was just crazy the way that Brandon kind of came at the Bravery. So later on in 2006, the Killers released their second album, their sophomore album, Sam's Town. And it seemed to kind of let the rivalry die down. They just blew up after that album. They concentrated on touring. That's really where the Killers just really took over the mainstream, kind of probably left the indie scene behind. The Bravery released their sophomore album, The Sun and the Moon, in 2007. And what's interesting is around that time of year when the Bravery were touring, Sam Endicott actually revealed that Brandon Flowers specifically called him out of the blue to apologize. He said it even when he got the phone call, it took him about 10 minutes to